Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Myself, Drew Franklin, here at HData, and today we're going to uncover a conversation around key performance indicators and benchmarking for electric utility companies. And I am so excited that you've been able to join us today. I will introduce our guest speaker here momentarily. And if I could just tee this conversation up a little bit, thinking about data is the lifeblood of your utility. Think about that. If you're thinking about data as the lifeblood for any company, insisting all decision makers from CEOs, CFOs, and setting long-term strategy all the way to entry-level business analysts, deciding which new software to implement for their team. But data-driven decision making only becomes more difficult as the amount of data one has at their fingertips grows at an exponential rate. Here's a stat for you. Just in 2022 alone, the total data created and captured is expected to be 97 zettabytes. That's right, zettabytes. Not kilobytes, not gigabytes, not megabytes, zettabytes. Huge. According to Statista, that's 97 trillion gigabytes. So the question we're going to kind of unpack during this webinar is, how do you know if the data point you're looking at is the right one amidst the slew of all the information? So I want to go ahead and kick it off. We have our today's presentation, again, is going to be KPIs and benchmarking for the electric utility industry. And we'll run into today's agenda, just a brief introduction of what we're talking about as it relates to key performance indicators and benchmarking. And let's briefly go into the overview, and then I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Luke Ashton, today. And then we'll go into a demo of how you can pull that information, where is that information coming from, and how you can really leverage data at your fingertips. I have a few closing remarks and a few exciting announcements we'll be able to share with you at the end of this presentation. So for just a quick overview, when we're thinking about key performance indicator, what is a key performance indicator, or the TLA, the three-letter acronym KPI? By definition, a key performance indicator are metrics that show success or failure toward a goal or a result. These metrics are thoughtful to the question they seek to answer and directly measure the result of activities to create tangible signals to change behavior if the goal isn't achieved, or reward behavior when the goal is achieved. KPIs need to be tailored to the area they aim to measure and can't be so broad as to provide no tangible insights. For example, suppose your electric utility company uses a metric of operation and maintenance, O&M expense. The number by itself can be insightful, but what if O&M expense increased 30% from the first quarter to the second quarter? Well, as we think about those questions, I want to introduce a person who could probably answer those questions. His name is Luke Ashton. He's a regulatory economist here at HData. And I've had just the privilege to get to know Luke over the past several months. And one of those items that I love to share about Luke is not only is he a regulatory economist, being able to really dig deep not only into policy, numbers, and be able to make sense of it all, but he specializes in open data policy and energy regulation. Luke earned his master's in economics from George Mason University and was a master's fellow and John B. Cotton Fellow at the Mercatus Center, where he focused on data and health policy. Outside of his professional life, Luke is a competitive solo and band bagpiper competing across North America and the British Isles. So not only are you in a treat to hear about data discussion, but we may even see a little bagpiping demo here towards the end, possibly. But Luke, I just want to go ahead and thank you for joining us today. And we'll go ahead and just kind of bring you up on stage and give us a little taste on your take on KPIs and how we're able to make sense of it all.
Yeah, sure thing. Unfortunately, my bagpipes are downstairs. I did not prep for a concert today. Plus, going over a bagpipe over a computer doesn't tend to really do it justice. You really need to be in person more to see that, which you can hire me. If you have a wedding or some kind of party, you can hire me. You can hear it in person if you need to. But thanks for having me on, Drew. Really appreciate diving into this topic. I know specifically what we're kind of diving into is related to an article I wrote a little bit earlier this year, and it kind of feels a little bit like eons since the last time I wrote it. That's the nine utilities that really, nine utility KPIs are really, really good to use when you are, especially in the regulated energy industry. I think a lot of what we're focusing in on right now is very, very good for when we want to focus on electric utilities within the regulated electric industry. And when I say regulated, that means either state regulated or federally regulated, either through a public service
Mhm.
commission or through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Um, so when we're looking at, and one caveat I will make to this is when we're talking about rate base and not and non-fuel O&M and A&G, a lot of these same ideas don't just apply to the electric industry, they do apply to gas and oil industry as well, maybe with a few slight tweaks. So like a good example is non-fuel O&M is very electric specific, but then when you're going into gas and oil, it may just be regular O&M. And I'll kind of dive into that a little bit uh, at towards the end. But when we're looking at top KPIs, they kind of go into a few different areas. When we're talking about rate base, that's a KPI really used for rate cases. So rate base specifically measures a lot of the specific asset value of the company, and that's because when you are negotiating with a state regulator or a federal regulator, rate base is the overall value of the company that you can then earn a rate of return on that rate base, which is used to determine your revenue that you can earn in a specified period. So because electric utilities tend to be in a heavily regulated field, and they're considered what a lot of people would say is a natural monopoly. They're given a monopoly over a specific geographic area in order to serve that area. So uh, in order to mitigate the abuses of being a monopoly, the state governments and the federal governments try to maintain a lower cost for the customers that they serve. And that lower cost is determined via rate cases, and rate base is a huge metric within that rate case. So if you're able to benchmark total value of a company, I know kind of tying it a little bit into the modern day, because this has been a concept that's been around for 60, 70, even 80 plus years. In the modern day, there's a lot of controversy surrounding how incentives are thrown into rate base. So, for example, if you are looking at the recent transmission notice proposed rulemaking that the FERC has instituted, there's a specific piece of that that is going to remove the construction work in progress incentive. So basically saying a company can include CWIP, that's what the acronym is, if they can include that in their rate base, it actually offers an incentive to build more infrastructure, but it's not used and useful at the moment and servicing customers at the moment. So when we're looking at something like rate base, it really is kind of a changing metric depending on the state you're in, the regulation that's being in place, and potentially even being reformed. So that's why rate base is really, really important because it's something that you need to stay on top of, and it's a huge number in order to determine ultimately how much money you are making if you're an electric utility, but also if we are the customers of that electric utility, ultimately how much we're going to be paying to the utility. Couple of the metrics that we see on the screen here: non-fuel O&M per megawatt hour generated. Non-fuel O&M is operation and maintenance costs. And the reason we say non-fuel is if you are living in 2022 as we record this, and I think I even stated that within the video I did for the article, gas prices were almost $5 a gallon when I probably wrote that article. It's gotten down. I got gas this morning for $3.50 a gallon at the gas station near me. So thankfully it's going down, but we're seeing massive fluctuations in gas prices and ultimately fuel prices around the world. So the reason we have non-fuel O&M is we subtract the fuel out of that O&M metric because fuel can wildly change from year to year. So understanding that we don't want a fluctuation to be just fuel. If we see a spike in the data, we don't want to automatically assume that, hey, something's happening, we don't know what it is. We don't want fuel to be within that assumption. If we actually see a spike and it's non-fuel O&M, then it's ultimately some other reason why that is going up the way it is. And we normalize that on a per megawatt hour generated basis. So how many megawatt hours are we generating as a company? The O&M is specifically targeting all the facilities that are generating the electricity. So we want to be able to normalize that in a way and then be able to compare that across different companies. So that's a very industry standard metric in order to compare how effective you are at what you're working on. So same thing with total non-fuel O&M, just the overall O&M number. Of course, you want to see how that's fluctuating from year to year. A&G expenses or administrative and general expenses. It's usually used hand in hand with O&M. A&G is basically everything else that's not associated with actually operating and maintaining, say, a power plant or transmission lines or distribution lines. A&G are the salaries, it's the benefits, it's the office supplies, it's the printers, it's all the other associated items that you would see associated with actually running a business, but it's not specifically tied to running a specific generation asset. And then transmission line maintenance per mile. This is specifically O&M for transmission lines. So for how many miles of transmission lines that, say, a company owns, and if you're a fully integrated utility, you're owning generation, transmission, and distribution. And you can understand O&M items from the FERC Form 1 and 13Q on each of these individual verticals of the electric industry. So we can understand O&M for generation, O&M for transmission, O&M for distribution. If we want to look at transmission O&M, we want to standardize that, normalize it in some way. And usually that's determined by the amount of lines or mileage of lines in transmission lines. So that's just a quick little overview, some of the KPIs that we have within our HData platform. And Drew, any questions on kind of what we discussed so far? I'm interested in see what you want to dive into a little bit more.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that overview, and I know you've had a in-depth experience working hand in hand with end users, customers, being able to make sense of just the amount of data. If you could just illuminate for us a little bit, where is this data coming from? How are we able to pull it? And what's been that maybe one of your favorite aha moments when talking with a customer on showing them like, hey, we can make sense of this data. Here's how. And what was that? You don't have to go into super details, but what was that specific where it's like, oh, this saved me hours or brought some life back into my work week, just being able to pull that data automatically.
Yeah, sure thing. That's a great question. So the reason we have a lot of this data, and I'll back up a little bit because these metrics that we discussed a little bit earlier, these are industry standard metrics. I'm not pulling this out of a hat and being innovative here in that sense. These are actually very industry standard stuff that we're dealing with. But I think what's unique about our approach is we can get this data in a much more effective manner and then be able to compare that data. And I think that's where we're able to provide a lot of value to our customers is because we utilize what the FERC has done with XBRL. So XBRL is Extensive Business Reporting Language, and it's a bunch of coding languages. If you're a coder, it's actually based in XML, and if you're not a coder, it's basically a lot of computer gobbledygook. But because of that, it actually makes data much, much easier to access. It makes it machine readable, and it makes it a lot quicker to access that data once it's actually been filed with the FERC. So the FERC instituted XBRL for all of its financial reports for FERC Forms 1 and 13Q, specifically for the electric industry. But then we're also looking at the FERC Form 2, 23Q for gas, and 6 and 6Q for oil, and then also the 714, which is used in the electric industry. So all these quarterly and annual reports that the FERC has put into this new XBRL format, companies can file that, and then we can automatically take those filings once it's been validated by the FERC, and within minutes, we can put it within our platform. And then from there, any calculations we've created, like non-fuel O&M per megawatt hour sold, as we get each new filing, it will automatically calculate that KPI for that company that's filing on an ongoing basis. So we don't have to rerun this calculation every single time we get new data. And what I think is unique that our customers are taking advantage of is if, for example, you wanted to get all the data points that would go into a non-fuel O&M metric, I would say there's maybe 6 or 7 different data inputs in the numerators and denominators. that's 6 or 7 unique lines of information within the FERC Form 1. And to get it for a single company for 10 years, you're going to have to download 10 filings in a PDF in the old way. And if you want to do that for 5 companies, that's 50 PDFs that you're going to have to download, put copy and paste into an Excel file, and then run the calculation. And right off the bat, you're probably getting a lot of, if you're listening to this now, you're probably getting a lot of sweats of having to download all these PDFs, copy and paste that data. That's a complete pain, to be frank. So we've automated that entire process. We've eliminated that as an idea. You don't have to do that anymore. And you can automatically take this information and then benchmark it on every single FERC regulated company in our entire data set. And that's roughly 200 plus electric utilities, both recent and historic, for the past 10 years. And the reason we have it for the past 10 years is because the FERC retroactively applied XBRL to 10 years worth of filings. So we have what we call our data drop of data that the FERC released, and then we have all the XBRL data on an ongoing basis in perpetuity until the FERC decides to do something else, and maybe in 40 or 50 years we find a new method of data standardization that's even better than XBRL. Who knows?
Love it. Love it. And that's an awesome segue into bringing us up. Luke, if you don't mind just getting your demo environment set up, I'd love to just walk through a little bit of what you just talked through, that scenario of really addressing that pain point. We've heard that from several customers that, man, it is really, really tough to pull all this Excel data or being able to manually input that data somewhere and then do something with it. And that, like
Mhm.
what you said, we've got a handful of customers that they live in that world every day. It can be stressful because it is, you're dealing with technology, and some things there are breakpoints. And I do believe XBRL gave us that opportunity to really streamline this opportunity and streamline the input and the output of data. So that's the beautiful thing. I'd love for you to just to show us a little bit of what that looks like. And I'll switch this over to you real quick, and we'll
Yeah.
go ahead and get you started on running us through just a quick demo of that scenario you just walked through.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'll go ahead and dive into our Explorer tool. That's really where the sausage is made in the sense of creating all these KPIs here. And I'll first dive into our comparison tool, which I think kind of highlights where all these KPIs sit and live. So I'm actually the previous search I've been looking at, I'm looking at Alabama Power right now, but I'm also looking at Georgia Power and Florida Power and Light. So I'm actually comparing 3 different companies here side by side on various metrics. And let me actually pull up the latest annual filing. That's where a lot of our KPIs sit within the annual filings. And then you'll get a lot of data filling into this table here. So on the top side here, we're looking at transmission line O&M by length of lines. So the length of lines is the mileage. So how much are we spending per mile of in O&M for transmission for every mile of transmission lines that we have? Same thing for non-fuel O&M per megawatt hour sold, and then non-fuel O&M per megawatt hour generated for steam, nuclear, hydro, and other. And that other category tends to kind of throw off some people. It's basically everything else other than hydro, nuclear, and steam, and this usually includes stuff like geothermal, solar, wind, a lot of the renewables, but it can also include non-renewable assets. I think in the future, the FERC is releasing a notice of proposed rulemaking to potentially reform how they account for that. So definitely check back in the future. We might be able to slice and dice that specific other category in the near future. I'm really, really excited for what the FERC is doing in that area of being able to actually show a lot more renewable specific information from the FERC Form 1 and 3Q. We can also look at non-fuel and per dollar revenue. So how for every dollar that we receive as an electric utility, what portion of that is being spent on O&M? So for example, for Alabama Power, roughly 26 cents for every dollar they receive is spent on O&M. Of course, this is subtracting out fuel. But for example, if I want to take a look at that data point, what I think is unique and what we've been able to do with the XBRL that the FERC has created is we can click on this number and then actually dive into the form itself and see where all these individual components are coming from in this calculation. So we're looking at total electric O&M expense. That is line 198, page 320. You can see that's highlighted in this little green here. And then if we wanted to look at, say, the operating revenues, that would be the denominator at that calculation. This is where operating revenues is being pulled from. So we can automatically jump to where that exists within the FERC form without actually needing to download a PDF. It's automatically rendered right in front of you. And then you can see how that number for non-fuel O&M per dollar revenue has been fluctuating on a year by year basis going all the way back to 2010. And then once we get the annual filings for 2022, it'll be adding another year to each of these visualizations on an ongoing basis. We can take a look at any of these. So if we want to look at non-fuel O&M per megawatt hour sold for FP&L, again, we can click on their number and then dive into their specific form. What's been kind of great is we can see how these numbers are changing, but sometimes just looking at a table is not enough. Sometimes you need a visualization and maybe a little bit more interactive visualization. So I would say that's where our visual analysis tool really comes into play. I have a few different visualizations that I've created here. And all these individual cards are a single visualization. So for example, if I wanted to create a new card here, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a list of companies that I've been looking at recently. So I was looking for a Puget Sound Energy peer group, and I had saved that as a list. So we can go ahead and use that for this. And then I want to go ahead and look at non-fuel O&M per dollar revenue. And I can go ahead, refresh that, we get a table view, but then I can also visualize that for all three companies at the same time. And you notice I'm not pulling any PDFs, I'm not pulling any Excel files, I'm not downloading anything. This is all sitting on all of the data that we've taken from these FERC forms, and we can automatically pull in the data that we need without actually needing to download the PDF. So we can kind of slice and dice this in a few different ways. One area I like to really focus in on is what I like to call the trend analysis. We can actually set a single company against a peer group. And the reason we like to do it on peer groups, and a lot of our customers like to do it on peer groups, is say you are an electric utility, you're engaging in a rate case. Typically, you are comparing your data against a peer group of you're comparing rates, you're comparing net income, you're comparing rate base, because you want to be able to show a regulator that you're operating in the margins of the peer group. You're not way below average or way above average. You want to actually be able to show, like, if you are way below average, you may need to increase your rates or readjust the relationship that you have with some of the agreements you've set with the state regulator. But if you are right on par, then you can actually show that to the state regulator. So if, for example, if I want to look at this on an average basis, I'm looking at Pacificor right now, and then I want to switch out to Puget Sound. What that does is it takes Pacificor, throws it into the peer group, takes Puget Sound out, and then puts Puget Sound on top of it, and then resets the peer group average. So now you can truly benchmark a single company against an entire group of companies that you want to look at. You can also do it across the entire industry. If you want to have all the companies in our data set and then benchmark on all the electric companies, you can do that as well. So that's pretty cool to be able to just quickly access this information. So, say I want to look at, I'm going to go ahead and save this. Save and close. All right, so now I've got a new card going, and there's a few ways I can actually share this information. I think one of the big barriers that a lot of the analysts that use our platform have typically experienced is just being able to share this information easily. And we can actually do that in a few different ways. You can share it as an iframe. So if you happen to have any HTML skills, I have none whatsoever. So I would usually hand it off to a web developer, or Drew in this case, when we do our blog posts. But if you have some HTML skills, some web skills, you can actually embed that into a website. So if you want to create, say, a action center or a dashboard for, say, your CFO of all the FERC companies on your peer group, then you can actually embed these, and they will be updated as new data comes in. So you don't have to recreate these visualizations every time a new annual filing comes in or an annual filing is resubmitted and the data changes. It all happens on the back end for you. So you don't have to do anything. You just got to embed it and you're done. You can also share these as individual links. So you can copy that link address, you can email it, you can Slack it, you can text it. You can really send that to whoever you need to. And once you send that link, they can play around with whatever you create. So if you want to switch out the companies, you can do that. If you want to change out the years, you can do that. Um, Another thing is you can actually flip these cards around. So if you get this little green, or not green, the white square at the top right hand here, you can flip these cards around, see the data feeding into the visualization, and then click on any of those numbers for a particular company, and hey, it brings up what we saw in the comparison tool, an actual rendered FERC form right in front of you. And this is still accessible to anyone who has access to your visualization. They can see where this data is coming from. And if you've worked with FERC data before, you probably remember those citations of page this, dot, column, dot, row. Yeah, you don't have to do that anymore because it actually renders right in front of you. You can see the actual PDF of what has been submitted to the FERC itself. Um, And I'll actually go back into the editor here because there is one company I want to highlight, and I think this is what's really important in understanding what KPIs are meant to do is we look at, I'm bringing in Pacific Gas and Electric, and if you've seen some of my blog posts or videos or you happen to live in California, you probably know where I'm going with this, but you can see the data has changed. The average has changed. We see these huge spikes in 2018 to 19, and say, for example, I want to look at Pacific Gas and Electric. A, that's the culprit. Why is their non-fuel O&M so high? Well, it's because of wildfires. So if you're, I love to bring this example up during all of our demos because I really think it highlights the usefulness of KPIs of being able to send a signal or a warning flag of how data can actually impact or show you what's happening within the real world. These spikes are because of wildfires in 2018 and 19. A lot of the wildfires destroyed the transmission infrastructure at PG&E had been managing, as well as distribution infrastructure, and they had to repair that. And they had to put in systems where they're either building new or they are retrofitting a lot of the transmission lines to be a lot more fire resistant. So this is a good example of how the quantitative side, the data side, can send those signals. And it really takes a good analyst to say, hey, that looks really weird. I need to actually find the qualitative event that this is tied to. And what we're doing at HData here is not just we're making it easier for the analyst to not be a data wrangler. Their job is to actually be the analyst and tie those quantitative signals to qualitative events. That's what they're paid to do. That's what they should be doing. They shouldn't be spending weeks and days trying to collect this data and clean it and then analyze it. We've done all that work for them. And I think this is why KPIs are also really, really important in order to show things like this of a signal of, hey, this is a very, very strong signal that we need to change something. And then actually impacting real world decisions and real world events. In this case, specifically impacting PG&E. So that's a quick little demo of our entire or not an entire platform, but we have several different tools within our platform. But within the comparison tool, visual analysis tool, I really like to use those as good examples of being able to share key performance indicators, visualize those key performance indicators. But we have several other tools where if you want to download all this data en masse, we have an API you can plug into. We also have our Insights Marketplace, which we didn't show in our demo, but definitely check out our website to see what that is. We include a lot of those KPIs as parts of drivers or a collection of dashboards where you can actually analyze a particular problem instead of being tied down to a particular form. And we're combining a lot of different data sets from the FERC, the EIA. So a lot of different ways you can kind of slice and dice this information.
That's awesome. Luke, thank you. I love what you said about being able to help provide and connect the dots for business analysts, the quantitative to the qualitative. I think that's a huge point because there's so much time and effort that happens in between those two points of gathering all the quantitative, but then getting it connected to the qualitative issues or solutions and being able just to connect those dots. And you said it spot on that the platform helps it do that and really bring that up to speed so much more quickly. But one thing you did mention was how can you test drive some of this, being able to analyze some of this in a way that's low pressure or an easy way to do that. And that's something we are so excited. Luke and I did another conversation around something we launched this past month. It's called the Energy Industry Scorecard. And this is a electric utility focused. We are working on some more scorecards in the near future. But this is an electric utility focused effort around scorecards. You can be able to use the same Explorer tool that Luke was demoing to have that visual analysis for the energy industry. And this is being able to pull all of that information from these FERC forms and being able to just quickly show this in a meaningful way. And you can do that today by just going to our website and looking under the resources tab, and you'll find the energy scorecard there. And Luke can definitely just walk us through briefly a little bit of just what we've put in there in the scorecard and what kind of meaningful data is visually shown there. So, Luke, I'm going to just tee it back to you real quick, and then if you just want to walk through briefly, what do we have in the scorecard area?
Yeah, sure thing. So this is our website, so you can see what we've been able to create here. And this is just a sample of one of the scorecards. Of course, if you want something a little bit more tailored or customized, definitely reach out. I'll probably be the one on the call demoing you through what we're doing here. So it's not, we're a very intimate kind of group, so you can really cater what we create for your specific needs. So when we're looking at the financial scorecard for electric, this is every single FERC regulated utility and some of the raw data that would go into a KPI as well as the KPI itself. So A&G per dollar revenue. Again, we're looking at the proportion of administrative and general expenses for every single dollar that we receive as a company. And it really depends on understanding the context of the data. When we're looking at, say, Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Corporation, they're a much smaller company, especially when compared to a lot of the other companies in their area. So an A&G per dollar revenue, that's $2. Yeah, that doesn't really make a ton of sense, but they may just be starting out, or they're a very, very small company. They may have a different operating structure that would explain why their A&G per dollar revenue is so high. But then when we look at a larger company like AP Southwestern Transmission Company, they're spending about 50 cents for every dollar that they receive on A&G. So that's maybe something that they should look at and say, how can we actually reform our A&G costs to try to keep that number down so we're not losing money, essentially. Same thing, you can understand this on non-fuel and M per dollar revenue. So as we scroll down here, we can see all these companies listed out. You can access this on our website. So if you want to be able to take a look at the non-fuel O&M and be able to filter that down, or if you want to look at O&M as a raw value, PG&E, their O&M cost was $12.5 billion, as in a B billion. It's absolutely massive. They are a huge company. And I can't even imagine what $12 billion would look like in person. But that's just a quick little visualization of the table, but we can understand it in a few different ways. We can visualize it. So I know I had talked about rate base a little bit. That's a very important metric in understanding the total value of the company. So if we want to look at Alette here, we can see how their rate base has changed. So say, for example, they're investing in new generation assets, or I know a big focus area in the past year or so has been on transmission and distribution infrastructure. So if you're actually able to see increases in their rate base because of investments in transmission and distribution infrastructure, this is where it will show. We can also understand the rates themselves on a per megawatt hour basis, and you can also, we calculate it on a per kilowatt hour basis as well. As reported within the FERC, they tend to report all of their volumes of electricity in megawatt hours. So that's what we're showing here. You can see how their residential rates have changed on a per megawatt hour basis. And then if you divide that so it's in kilowatt hours, then you have a little bit more standardized way that the customer would actually be seeing on their electric bill every month. We can also look at specifically transmission. So I brought up a little bit of transmission rate base. Transmission plant value, that's what feeds into the rate base. So you can see how particular companies are investing in transmission infrastructure. You can also show the transmission expenses. So is the transmission expenses matching what we would see in transmission infrastructure? Or say, for example, they're investing in new transmission infrastructure that is actually much more cost efficient. So if, say, you are a let and you're investing in your transmission plant and increasing that value, but you're investing in transmission plants that's supposed to decrease costs, then you'd want to see your transmission expenses slightly stagnant, i.e. not really changing much, or even going down or even changing maybe up slightly. But you don't want it in proportion to the transmission infrastructure you're investing in. It really depends on what kind of transmission lines you're investing in. The quality, the quantity, this all factors into these numbers that you're seeing on the screen here. So this gives you a quick flavor of what our transmission scorecard looks like. Of course, if you want to get something a little bit more customized, if you want to focus on, say, some generation assets, how it's focusing on transmission stuff, we can focus a little bit more on a generation side of things. It really is up to you. The world is your oyster at this point. So let's definitely shuck some oysters if we can.
There you go. Love the shucking the oyster reference there.
I had
Well,
oysters
Luke,
last night, so that's why I made that reference.
top of mind. I love it. Well, good deal. Well, Luke, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll kick this back off here. And then, so with that, I do wanted to quickly just run through again the energy scorecard. You can find that under the resources tab at hdata.us. And I just want to send a quick thank you if you're still with us watching this webinar. Again, tracking those key performance indicators. We know it's imperative to know that the data you receive to calculate these KPIs, it's accurate, it's timely, and most of all, it's insightful. The problem is there are numerous data sources you can use. And which one do you choose? And that's kind of the question a lot of data analysts or business analysts probably find themselves in. There's data sources that we are very in tuned with, but we believe at H Data it shouldn't be a decision of one or the other. Why can't you have both? Why can't you have all the above? And we hope that we can be able to show you how you can visualize that and pull those data into meaningful and insightful KPIs. And if you have any questions like this, I want to encourage you just on some next steps. What does that look like? Feel free to visit our website. Shoot us an email. And one thing I want to encourage you, if you're not already part of our FERC professionals group on LinkedIn, please feel free to join us there. A lot of good conversation, a lot of insights being shared within that group. And again, I want to thank you for watching this, and we hope to talk to you soon.